Good morning and good afternoon. Welcome to the Weekend Wellness Hours show. I am very excited to have kind of a recent new friend join me today. So I met Yogi Aaron through a really good friend of mine, Sherry Shaban, who is an osteopath in Canada. And last year she went away on a yoga retreat to do some yoga teacher training. When she came back, she was a different person. Her personality was much different. And I tell her this all the time. She was very calm, just a completely different energy about her. And recently she introduced me to the man who made this happen, Yogi Aaron, who I'm going to let him share about his background because he has amazing background, goes 30 years into yoga, and he has this process. So we are going to let Yogi Aaron share and have a nice conversation about this. So thank you for coming on today.
You're very welcome. Thank you so much for having me. I hope I can add to the conversation at the very least. And if not that, then make it entertaining. So
You already started this morning with it being entertaining, so we're on a good start. So tell us a little bit about your background, because I know you are a podcast host as well for a podcast called Stop Stretching. You had 8 episodes and you told your story, but why don't we go into it a little bit, because it helps people relate to you and it helps people understand you're making some great, amazing changes in people's lives.
Thank you. Thank you. I've been a yoga teacher for pretty much the better part of 30 years and practicing just a little bit longer than that. And I probably got into yoga like most people do. If I've surveyed a lot of people and asked them why they got into yoga. And a big part of it is really because they're looking to stretch. They want to become more flexible. And one of the things that kind of popped up just as a side note, from polling people as much as I did during the making of Stop Stretching, one of the things that I came to realize is that a lot of people get into or get on the stretching bandwagon, if you will, because they equate stretching or they equate flexibility with being young or being more healthy. And I remember at the age of 18 looking around and seeing people who were more mobile in their body, especially people that were older, that they had more mobility in their body. So I too started to equate like this idea of flexibility, mobility with being young and having vigor in your step. It was something I kind of like gleaned when I was 18. And so that's kind of what really got me into yoga, is just this paranoia of like, I don't want to get old. But what kind of a couple things happened, and it would take me another 25 odd years to kind of start putting the pieces together, is that when I started doing yoga, I actually started injuring myself. And one of the things that a lot of yoga teachers will say, I will actually go on a limb and say all yoga teachers will say is, let me put that in quotations just for the people that are listening, not watching, that is that they will say, hey, this is part of the practice. Just do the practice. The practice will take care of it. You just got to work through it. And I did. And I got worse and worse and worse. And I could really kind of fill in a lot of details. And I'm happy to answer any questions. But kind of, I think the nail in the coffin for me, or the straw that broke the camel's back, however you want to word it, was when I almost ended up in surgery with a spinal fusion. And that was a huge, huge wake-up call. I'm like, I am the kind of person that I pay particular attention to my body. Again, I'm doing this in quotations for the listeners, listen to my body. And I'm so fastidious about alignment. So how did I do this to myself? And so that was the point when I decided to make some big changes. And I kind of was already on the fence about making some changes, but that was, as I said, the nail in the coffin when I said, I can't teach stretching anymore. This is not helping me. And if it's not helping me, it's definitely not helping other people.
Yeah. And just a quick comment in there too. And you had a nice realization that what you were doing led you up to the point of where you were in pain and considering surgery. So it's time to
Mhm.
examine all the aspects of your life that led you to that path. And you did that, thankfully, and you avoided having surgery. You're like, okay, what has changed from when I was a little kid to now that
Yeah.
has led? And you figured out, what happened. So many times we don't really think of that. We just kind of blame it on some type of injury, or we don't really put pieces together. But it's great. You're like, okay, pause here. I'm about to become bionic with, this fusion and metal and all these things. What can I change? So please continue. I just wanted to say thank you for pointing that out.
You're very welcome. Well, just as a total sort of off topic
Mhm.
remark, that I think two of the things that kind of helped me get the most therapy in my life. The first one was writing my first book, Autobiography of a Naked Yogi,
Mhm.
because I started to realize things about my life that kind of started putting pieces together. And the
Yeah.
second one was doing this podcast, the 8 episodes of
Mhm.
Stop Stretching, because I started to. That really made me realize one of the things that I didn't make that leap of stop stretching or stop teaching stretching in my yoga, because I really was sitting with, if I'm not teaching stretching, then how am I teaching yoga?
Yep.
Like, what am I teaching if I'm not teaching stretching? And that was a huge light bulb moment for me. And since then, I've actually talked to certain yoga teachers who will vocally say to students, like, yoga is not about flexibility, it's not about touching your toes.
Yeah.
But then that's what they're teaching. So how can you kind of like say one thing and then mean another thing? How
Yeah.
can you say that it's not about doing this pose when you're up in front of the class, showing people this incredible, beautiful symmetry in your body? I mean, visually, it's stunning.
Mhm. Mhm.
Um, but practically it's a whole other story.
Yes. Yes. It's
So
it's hard to go against the grain of society. You know that well,
yeah.
and I felt it as well. It is hard to go against what someone thinks is a cultural phenomenon or has been taught over the decades, over the centuries. But as you know, sometimes we have to push through that.
Well, I mean, I've kind of made a resolution at the beginning of this year,
Mhm.
2022, that I would put this out there, and
Yeah.
without ego, with just to
Mhm.
be in service. It's going to land where it's going to land. I'm not trying to change the world. If I can just help a few people feel better in their body, then I'm and stronger and more confident, because I
Mhm.
believe from personal experience mostly, that when I'm in pain, like debilitating pain, I can't do anything in life. Like, I'm just not in service to anybody. I want to crawl up into a small ball in my bed and not get out. I can't do
Mhm.
the things I love, like hiking or scuba diving, or
Yeah.
even just playing with my dogs. I can't do anything. And so I think that there's a lot to be said about, you need to feel strong and you need to feel stable in your own body. And if you have those two things, there's this kind of natural confidence that you have, so that you can go out and live a more purposeful life. So that's kind of the fuel in my fire that
Yeah.
drives me to, because I really want to support others to live a more purposeful life.
Yeah.
And if you're living purposeful life, then you're happier. And if you're happier, then, oh God, the world will just be better.
We need more of that. Yes, for sure. Absolutely. So, and it's true. So, like, when you were faced with the surgery, you decide, okay, I'm going to change things up. How did you go about that? What did you come to in your mind that said, okay, I need to stop doing yoga the way I perceived yoga to be and change it up?
Um, so I had mentioned just a moment ago that I had actually already been considering changing the path, but that whole
Mhm.
idea of when am I teaching if I'm not teaching stretching was sort of sitting there. So that was one factor. But around about 10 years, more or less, before that, I had met Eric Steibel, who is an MAT therapist. He's also has like 100, literally 100 certificates behind his name, including chiropractor. So he's done it all, Rolfing, everything.
Okay.
And he has worked on me for many, many, many years. But the number one thing that he always comes back to or always uses, and by his own admission, out of all the modalities he uses, that's the one that gives the most results, is a method called muscle activation technique. Not to be confused with what I'm teaching, because I'm not teaching muscle activation technique. Muscle activation technique was designed by a man named Greg Roskopf. Anybody can Google muscle activation technique and find their website. It's basically a modality that goes in and he's created a diagnostic to test if muscles are weak or strong, where there is muscle weakness. And what he has found is, and this is going at a neurological level, so he's actually not testing the muscle. What he's actually doing is testing the neural connection between the brain and the muscle. Is the muscle connected to the brain? And then if not, then to activate the muscle. And so Eric would work on me using this technique, and I would go in sometimes, countless times I went into him. My back was out, my neck was kinked up, something was going on, and I was in excruciating pain. And he always managed to bring my pain level down from like 8, 9 down to a 1, 2 in one session. And it just blew me away. Like, I've been to massage therapists, I've been to acupuncturists, they always manage to bring the pain down a little bit, but not to that degree, and never to a point where it was sustained over time. And so after my close brush with spinal fusion, I went to go visit Eric. At that time, he was living in New York. And I spent 8 days in New York, and I saw him every single day. And he'd already kind of shared with me some things about muscle activation technique, but one of the things that got very clear was, and he demonstrated on me, was what happens when I stretch. So he would get the muscle strong, and then he would do something very passive. And when I say very passive, like not something like forceful, like pushing me into a deep stretch where I'm like, back off, nothing like that. He would just do something very gentle and passive, like for example, lift one leg off the ground about 30 degrees and just kind of move it a little bit, and then move the leg down. And all my hip flexors, he showed me this because he tested me afterwards, all my hip flexors shut down. And he did a few other things where muscles just stopped working. And I was like, I can't teach stretching anymore. I can't do this. If I felt it in my body. And since then, after my close brush with spinal fusion, and he worked on me about a year later, I was like, Eric, I'm really thinking about studying something else. I feel like I need to learn more. And I was considering MAT, and then he said, I think you should do it. You will get like so much out of it. And so I thought, okay, let's do this and just see what happens. Like, at the worst, I'll learn a little bit about anatomy. I'll, have some fun learning because I love to learn. And at the most, maybe there'll be some, more information I can bring into my yoga. And as I got into it more and more, I was just astounded by the results. And so that question started percolating, like, how do I integrate this into yoga? And I would ask my teachers, like, how do I integrate this into yoga? But none of them were yoga people, So I was like, okay, I guess that's up to me now to figure that part out. So that's how I developed AYAMA. AYAMA is applied yoga anatomy and muscle activation. It's not a fancy Sanskrit term. Some people think, oh my God, is this a new Sanskrit word? It's not. It is close to a Sanskrit word, and I can opine on it if you want, but it's really just an acronym for applied yoga anatomy and muscle activation, AYAMA. And it's one of the things in the yoga world is that in Yoga Alliance requires yoga teachers to have, it used to be 20, but now it's 30 hours of anatomy training. And what a lot of yoga teachers who read yoga teacher trainings do is they'll do one of two things, and sometimes both, is they'll have an expert come in and talk about anatomy for a certain amount of time. And then all the students are like, wow, that was really interesting. And then if you ever ask any of those teachers that did that anatomy training, do you remember anything? Like, what can you tell me about it? It was interesting. I loved it.
Yeah.
Don't remember a darn thing. And then the other tool that they'll use is much like you did probably when you were 15, 10 years, 10, 12, 15 years old. In school, you used to color in muscle charts, and I did that, and I don't remember a darn thing. I always actually failed anatomy in school. Miserably. So when I was doing my MAT training, one of the things that kind of stuck out with me was how much we had to learn, but also apply it. And that's the applied part of this word, is like, I want teachers to actually get in and learn where the muscles are, where muscle attachments are, how they work, and actually start to see it with their students. And so we go through that in a lot of detail. Do you see how this muscle is shortening here? Do you see how this muscle is shortening? Now go and feel it on your students. And then the muscle activation is this integration of muscle activation, kind of yoga postures, if you will, or bringing muscle activation into yoga postures so that it becomes more dynamic as opposed to just stagnant.
That's amazing. So you're taking basically two different approaches, you're merging them together to create an even greater result. So when you work with people,
yeah, I just want to just kind of, just for the benefit of MAT, I just want to say, like, I wouldn't say that I'm integrating MAT. I would say that I'm integrating more of the isometrics. MAT is more of a manual approach, although we did learn some isometrics, but that's not really the modality that we use. We use more of a manual kind of hands-on, manipulation approach, where what I'm doing is now just looking at yoga postures, many of the yoga postures, and then some other techniques, and going, okay, well, if we're going to do, like, say, for example, our theme is a forward bend class. Well, then what are the muscles that need to shorten in order for a forward bend to happen? And then let's approach it from preparing the body, so that way we can come into a forward bend with stability, because the muscles are shortening properly, so they're holding the body in place properly, and then there's also stability. So I'm sorry, just in case someone from MAT was listening to this, I didn't want them to think I was teaching MAT, because I'm not teaching MAT.
Got it. So you're kind of pulling pulling some ideas, and using that to apply to yoga. And so it sounds like you're still doing some of the traditional yoga poses. Is that right? Or are you modifying all the poses?
I would say I still teach traditional yoga. If somebody asked me what kind of yoga I teach, I would always say I teach hatha yoga. And I think that hatha yoga, there's elements of hatha. I mean, this is kind of, maybe it's off topic, maybe it's on topic, I don't know. But the whole principle of hatha yoga is this idea of, if we move the body, if you move into a twist, there's a certain energetic result that happens. Now, if you want to relate it to physiology, you can say that, there's a parasympathetic, sympathetic, response in the body, but energetically, We know that there's this kind of stoking, if you will, that happens at the digestive system. And the ancient yogis saw prana moving a certain way. So if you move into a forward bend, there's more of a parasympathetic response. If you move into a back bend, there's more of a sympathetic response, and but in a positive way. And so there's certain like energetic benefits, and so that, I mean, I'm completely sold on that, and I've seen it work on people. But then the question is, well, how do you take these ancient postures? How do you take like them? And so one of my number one kind of rules or guidelines or suggestions, whatever you want to say, is to, instead of coming into the posture like all the way, only go like 25, 35, 30% of what you think you should do, and just stay there. And just instead of like going all the way, just practice going a little ways and focus more on the breath, and focus more on breathing.
Yeah. Okay, so you're guiding people through this, and they're going into these different positions. Now, are you building up to being able to achieve a position by doing other little exercises or positions? Or is it more kind of what you just described, is go into that position 20%, 25% and work your way?
Well, it depends. I mean, when I'm saying, what I'm thinking right now of like, 30% perhaps is like a seated forward fold. A seated forward fold, people will reach forward, try and grab their, their feet and pull their torso forward, or use a strap, or have somebody come up behind them and push them forward. What I'm suggesting is just practice, if you're going to do a seated forward fold, using that as an example, just practice sitting up. Your spine, your top of your head, sitting over your tailbone. Close your eyes, go in and just breathe, and be as still as possible. Now that would be a pose that we would build up to. Okay, so I would probably do a series of postures to activate all the muscles in the front body. But if we're doing like a pose, for example, which I personally love, which is wheel pose. I see like so many yoga teachers do the wrong techniques. I'm going to say wrong.
Yes, go bold.
Go bold or go home. There's the wrong things in preparing for this pose. Like you'll see them stretching the front of your thighs. Well, we know from an AYAMA perspective, if you stretch the front of your thighs, you actually shut down the hamstrings. The hamstrings just won't work, and the glutes won't work. So if I'm stretching my thighs and trying to force my tight thighs to open up, the hamstrings stop working and the glutes stop working. Well, those are the muscles that are actually supposed to be shortening and supporting the hip structure as you're coming up into like wheel pose. And that never became more evident than recently. A co-teacher that was working with me was leading up to wheel, and not only did she teach these deep thigh stretches, but she actually had people work in partners where the person behind was actually forcing the heel of the foot to the glute. And the next day I had like 4 students come up to me in pain, like groin pain, knee pain, like all of these things, and they couldn't understand why. And I was like, yeah, that's why. Because they went and forced themselves into a pose without muscles that were supporting their body. So I've seen this play out time and time again. As soon as people start stretching, they get into trouble. But coming back to wheel, it's kind of interesting, because if you see a typical yoga class with wheel, a teacher will use 20 to 30 poses to prepare for wheel. Like they will go through all of these kind of stretches. And I kind of say to my students, you know how many poses it takes to prepare for wheel? 3. You only need to do 3 poses to do for wheel, because you just need to get the back muscles working properly.
And for those who are not familiar with wheel pose, can you give a little verbal description of it? just in case.
Sure.
Yeah.
So, well, you make your body like a wheel. So it's kind of like when you're on your back
Mhm.
and you lift and you bend your knees, and then
Mhm.
you bend your knees and then you lift your hips up, and
Mhm.
then you would bring your hands by your ears and then come up onto the top of your head, and then if you could, you would actually straighten your arms, pushing the whole front of your body towards the sky,
Good, good.
and that would be wheel pose. So
I just want to make sure not everyone here is familiar with all the yoga positions and terms. So just to help people get a visualization. So thank you.
sure, absolutely.
Yeah. So in your yoga world, in your training, you would walk people through three different positions to help them prepare for the wheel pose.
Sure, yeah.
And those positions would involve some isometrics, which means holding the muscle or pushing against a resistance or keeping a constant resistance against the muscle to stimulate it.
So one of the things in MAT that I took away and I kind of implemented it into AYAMA. So it is the
Mhm.
one MAT thing. And I don't know if this actually came from MAT or if
Mhm.
it's just something out there in the world, but the magic number for isometrics,
Mhm.
there's a couple of magic numbers, but one of them is 6 seconds,
Mhm.
6 times.
Okay.
So if you want to activate a muscle, so if I'm actually sitting here right now and I bring my arms out and up to the sky at a
Mhm.
like making a V,
Yeah.
and I don't move my trunk. I'm keeping
Mhm.
my trunk and spine completely stable. It's not moving, but I'm just moving my arm bones back. I'm actually isolating my trapezius, my lower traps.
Mhm.
So if I wanted to do that, which I actually sometimes do that, especially if I'm flying a lot, I come waiting for the flight, I'll like activate my traps before looking at what is that guy doing.
That's
But
awesome.
but so then I'll just do it 6 seconds, 6 times. Or
Mhm.
if I want to activate my oblique muscles, I'll just do a little twist here,
Mhm.
and rotate my torso, and I'll do that for 6 seconds, and I'll do it 6 times.
Mhm.
And one of the rules when you're doing the isometrics is that less is more. So you're not trying to do anything to the muscle per se. What you're trying to do is just reconnect the brain to the muscle. So there's that six
Yeah.
second, 6 times kind of thing. But
Yeah.
yes, so the
That's
three
great.
poses, I don't
Mhm.
know if you want me to tell the three poses, but I can tell you really quickly. One of them is bridge pose, which is when
Okay.
you bend your knees and you lift your hips up and you
Mhm.
squeeze the glutes as much as you can. So that's one of them. Another one is my favorite yoga posture. I think that everybody needs to do it. Is a pose called Shalabhasana or locust pose, where you lie on your stomach and you just lift your chest and your legs up as high as you can.
Mhm.
That one is just golden for so many reasons. And then the third one is just leaving the legs down, but lifting the chest up, and then kind of doing that thing with the arms, bringing the arms to 45 degrees and just lifting up and trying to isolate and activate the trapezius muscle.
Gotcha. Yeah. So in all of these positions, people are doing them for a period of time. They're obviously breathing, as you mentioned
Mhm.
earlier. They're going through making sure they're doing some type of breath work to make sure they're not holding their breath, overstimulating their sympathetic fight or flight nervous system. So that's great that you're doing that. Now, as you're teaching the Ayama, is this something for people, the general population, as well as people who want to become yoga teachers, or is it more for yoga teachers who come to your resort, which we haven't spoken about in Costa Rica?
Which is not what's behind me, just for clarity. No, it's Yama's for anybody. I'm on a mission to
Mhm.
spread the word of a Yama. I'm just kidding. I'm I'm on a mission to help people because so many people are in pain in their body. And it's trying to give people like simple tools to use. I'm actually I don't know if I told you this before, but I'm actually coming out with my book, which is, that's kind of coinciding with the podcast, Stop Stretching, a new yogic approach to master your body and live pain-free. And in the back of that book is going to be, throughout the book is going to be a whole bunch of exercises so people can start to see like, oh yeah, I've got this kind of problem, so I can do these exercises. But in the back of the book is actually 4 short yoga sequences that people can actually do on their own as well.
That's amazing. Really, this is wonderful. And so tell us, of course, people probably want to hear about Costa Rica, your resort, Blue Osa. Please tell us about that.
Blue Osa is open 2010, and since then we've welcomed yogis, like a lot of yogis, and so we host 3 different kinds of guests. One of them is yoga groups. So if you decide that you want to, have a yoga retreat and bring a group of people to a beautiful place, not a yoga retreat, but some sort of retreat.
Other retreat, yes.
Other retreat. We welcome not just yoga people. We welcome all kinds of people. You don't have to do yoga to come to Blue Osa. We also have individual packages. One of our most popular packages, the spa package, where you get a delicious spa treatment every single day. And then we also do the teacher trainings, which is what I kind of spearhead and lead. Okay. So that's my baby. And I also do AYAMA retreats as well. So that's something else I like to do.
Yeah. And so in your expertise and experience, when people need a retreat to get away, to decompress, to regenerate, how many days should they be there? Obviously, people probably want to stay there once they come, but just in general.
The biggest mistake that people make when they book a vacation with us is we have the minimum 4 days. So some people come in for 4 days. It's just not enough time.
Yes.
So I would say that 7 is good and more is better. I lead the teacher trainings, and I do a 14-day and 28-day option. And every single teacher training, at the end, people are like crying, like, I don't want to leave.
That's wonderful.
But ideally, like 7 days is really a good time, just to kind of go to a place. One of the beautiful things about Blue Osa is that there's certain elements of the yoga tradition that we've embodied. Like, for example, we have morning silence until 7:30. So nice. We tell all of our guests, like, there's no talking. and there's certain rituals that we have throughout the day. One of them is we invite guests to grab like a cup of tea or coffee or something. And we have this beautiful seated area down by the ocean where people can actually watch the sunrise and, have their cup of their favorite hot beverage in the morning. So there's a stillness that kind of is so embodied and already kind of weaving into the property that when you go there, so many people report like they just feel like the moment they step on the property, it's like, whew. We also turn the internet off. We turn the internet off during morning silence, and we also turn the internet off during dinner time.
Nice. People have to talk or socialize.
Or whatever they want to do, but it's so invaluable, I think, just to have that space where you can just kind of like let go of everything and just be able to move inwards. And that's, for me, that's the name of the game, is just allowing people space to just tune everything out and go inwards and listen.
Yeah. That's wonderful. Oh, this is great. So, so you have, people can check out your podcast. You already have a book that's out, but you have another one that's coming out. And where can they learn more about you?
The best place to learn more about me is go to yogiaaron.com. So YOGIAARON.com. And they can access everything that's there.
Okay, that's wonderful. And eventually come and work with you in Costa Rica, which would be
Yes.
amazing. So,
Yeah, but not everybody has that ability, and I
yeah.
don't know if I'll be out in the world. So I would strongly
Mhm.
encourage people to check out my YouTube channel, which they can access through my website, or go to YouTube
Oh,
and
good.
search Yogi Aaron. There's all kinds of like great tools there for people to access these AYAMA techniques. I don't
Yeah,
teach stretching anymore.
good.
But I do teach people how to start accessing their body in a very profound way.
Yeah. Oh, that sounds wonderful. I really encourage people to do that. So thank you so much for coming on here today. Really appreciate your time. I really, really appreciate it. And thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much for having me. It's just been
Yeah.
a real delight to share this with more
Yeah.
people and living in my passion. So
Yeah.
thank you.
Okay. And thank you all for joining us today. Have a wonderful rest of your weekend. Take care, and we'll see you next week. Bye now.